evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the session Gurukul of Gurus. As part of the IIMK Silver Jubilee celebration, we're delighted to host a session with a distinguished panel of leading light, or rather gurus, from the field of academics, innovation, and consulting. This session is an attempt for a befitting opening chapter for the IIMK Gurukul inaugurated recently, and is also a solemn tribute to commemorate late Professor C.K. Prahalad, whose influence and contribution to the body of knowledge will always be cherished. Has a short video celebrating late Professor C.K. Prahalad.
A globally renowned management thinker, an eminent thought leader, a prolific writer, with several international bestsellers to his credit. Professor Coimbatore Krishnarao Prahalad, known to close friends as CK, was all this and more. He was deeply committed to India's economic, cultural, and moral development. A commitment that led to the Padma Bhushan being conferred on him in 2009. Professor C.K. Prahalad was a distinguished university professor at the University of Michigan and was twice voted the world's leading management thinker by Thinkers 50, first in 2007 and again in 2009. He was also the winner of 4 McKinsey Awards for the Best Article of the Year in the Harvard Business Review. He is best known for his pioneering work titled The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, a book in which he outlined a model for large firms to engage with the economically backward sections of society. The Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, in his message said, Professor Prahalad's brilliance was dazzling. He was widely acclaimed as one of the most influential management thinkers ever, and his contribution to modern business theory and practice was invaluable. Professor Prahalad's bold and amazingly innovative ideas benefited companies around the world, including those of India. He was also a prolific writer, well known for many seminal works in the field of management.
Leaders must lead. You cannot lead unless you are future-oriented. Leadership is about the future. Leadership is about a point of view about that future.
Strategy to me is about folding the future in. It is not extrapolating the past and certainly not positioning yourself in the current. We need to have clarity to the goals and the belief that we can invent the means.
We must have a point of view of India we want to create and how to convert the principles enshrined in the Constitution into reality. I would like to call this Sampurna Azadi.
The drive to entrepreneurship, the fundamental premise is your aspiration must always exceed your resources. You must have an aspiration which by design, not by default, which by design must exceed your resources. And that is when you create creativity and you get innovation. Benchmarking by definition assumes somebody is already there.
India needs next practices. India must have the courage to chart its own path.
And in the last 5 years, I've been spending a lot of time looking at opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid. We have the most phenomenal opportunity in the world.
I suggested in a paper I wrote called My Vision for India at 75 that the first step is to educate 500 million Indians in world-class skills. We must realize that achieving social justice in a complex polity such as India requires socio-political innovations of a massive scale. We have to reimagine politics and governance as it is practiced in India.
500 Rajas lived in this country before independence. The British did not want independence. In spite of all that, without television, without internet, without radio, without large number of newspapers, we created a common vision for all of India. I believe that India has the opportunity to actively shape the emerging world order. I believe that this is something that happens once in 50, 60 years, once in a lifetime opportunity for India.
India has the potential to be the beacon of hope for the whole world. Sense of Indianness is a prerequisite to accomplish this goal. India is the largest single experiment in democracy and social justice the world has ever seen. Leaders in India, in fact all Indians, have to ask themselves, what will be the judgment of history? What will be our legacy? I also believe that people want to be heard more than anything else. They hunger for opportunity more than handouts.
May I now request Professor Deepa Sethi to introduce the panelists for this event?
Thank you, Ayushi. It is indeed an honor to introduce the luminary guests on the occasion. We have with us Dr. M.S. Krishnan, the Associate Dean, Executive Education and Executive MBA, Accenture Professor of Computer Information Systems, and Professor of Technology and Operations at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. He has co-authored the book, The New Age of Innovation, Driving Co-Created Value with Global Networks, with late Professor C.K. Prahalad. His research interest includes business model innovation, technology-enabled personalization, ecosystem innovation, business value of IT investments, productivity, and customer satisfaction. In January 2000, the American Society for Quality, the ASQ, selected him as one of the 21 voices of quality for the 21st century. In 2004, he was selected as one of the top thinkers on business technology by Information Week Optimized magazines. His research articles have appeared in several journals: Management Science, Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, to name a few. Dr. Krishnan has consulted on technology and strategy with Ford Motor Company, IBM, Nestle, Mahindra & Mahindra, the CP Group in Thailand, Infosys, and many other leading firms. It's great to have you amongst us, Professor.
Thank you.
We also have on the panel Dr. Ramesh Mashilkar. Dr. Mashilkar is probably best known to the common man through his crusade against the US patents on turmeric, neem, and basmati rice. Arguing that the healing properties of turmeric are well known as traditional knowledge in India, Dr. Mashilkar fought a 14-month-long legal battle to revoke the patent and emerged victorious. This victory was so significant that it changed the way patents were classified and earned him the moniker of the warrior of Haldi Ghati. He has authored 25 books, more than 250 research papers, and has been awarded honorary doctorates by 44 universities from India and abroad. He has also actively served the government of India by chairing 12 highly empowered Mashilkar committees, member of the Scientific Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. Dr. Mashilkar has been honored by a number of awards, the most significant being the Padma Vibhushan, the Padma Bhushan, the Padma Shri, and the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize for Science and Technology. He is the third Indian engineer to be inducted as a Fellow of the Royal Society, UK, and the first Indian to be elected as a Fellow of National Academy of Inventors, US. Currently, Dr. Mashilkar is the President of the Global Research Alliance. which is the world's largest network of publicly funded and R&D institutes that work together to achieve Millennium Development Goals. Dr. Mashelkar is also the chairperson of the National Foundation of India, which aims at promoting grassroots innovations to solve some of society's biggest problems. Thank you for joining us, Professor. Let me now introduce another esteemed panelist, Art Kreiner. Art Kreiner is a writer and editor on management and future-oriented topics. Between 2005 and 2020, he was editor-in-chief of Strategy and Business, the award-winning management magazine currently published by PwC. In that capacity, he published several articles of C.K. Prahalad and conducted an in-depth interview with him, published posthumously, called The Life's Work of a Thought Leader. Kleiner's books include The Age of Heretics, A History of the Radical Thinkers, and Corporate Management. Who Really Matters? The Core Group Theory of Power, Privilege, and Success. And also The Wise Advocate, The Inner Voice of Strategic Leadership. Co-authored with research psychiatrist Jeffrey M. Schwartz and executive coach Yossi Thompson. He is a faculty member at New York University's Interactive Telecommunications Program, a partner in the neuroscience science-based leadership development firm Wise Advocate Enterprises, and also the co-founder of the editorial consultation firm Kleiner Powell International. Thank you for joining us, Kleiner. And finally, I introduce the moderator of today's panel discussion, Ms. Deepa Prahalad Abhyankar. Deepa Prahalad is an author and innovation consultant. She has worked with startups and large multinationals and co-authored the book, Predictable Magic, Unleash the Power of Design Strategy to Transform Your Business, which was selected by Fast Company as one of the best design books of the year. She writes frequently for the Harvard Business Review, Strategy and Business, Business Week, and other magazines. Deepa is an elected member of the International Academy of Management and was ranked 34 on the inaugural Thinkers 50 India list. She was recently selected by the leadership guru Marshall Goldsmith into his 100 Coaches program from over 16,000 global applicants. Deepa speaks on innovation and design strategy at leading companies and business schools such as Harvard and the USC, and mentors leading social entrepreneurs. She is active on several advisory boards, including the Global Peter Drucker Forum, Arogya World, and Modroof, an innovative, sustainable roofing company in India. Deepa is also a board member for South Asian Art Collection at the San Diego Museum of Art and designed the newly created House of India Museum in Balboa Park. She is a BA in Economics and Political Science from the University of Michigan and an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. It's great to have you here, Deepa.
Thank you, Professor Deepa, for the introduction. Before I invite our Honorable Director, we have a short video on Indian leadership model with some glimpses of IIMK.
What I see with some degree of clarity is that leaders should have a bifocal vision. What does it mean? It means that I should be able to see what's far away, but at the same time I should be sensitive to the context, to see what is near, the nuances of what is playing out in the immediacy of my environment. IIMK has a vision called 2047. Our book of vision says that in the year 2047, when independent India, politically independent India becomes 100 years old, and IIMK as an institution is 50 years old, we are 25 now. At that inflection point, what should this institute stop doing so that it remains relevant in 2047 as an institution? Not what it should do, but what it should stop doing. The Indian leadership model can be best described with the word Rajarshi. Rajarshi is a compound word that breaks up as Raja plus Rishi. What is Raja? Raja is the hardware of leadership. What is Rishi? Rishi is the software. And if you look at a Raja, you look at an Arjuna. And if you look at a Rishi, you look at a Krishna. Without a Krishna, there is no Arjuna. Without an Aristotle, there is no Alexander. Without a Chanakya, there is no Chandragupta. What does that really mean? It means that the dynamism of the executive, of the Raja, has to be tempered by the directional and visionary component of the advisor, the Rishi, the counselor. And the software of the Rishi, the reflective capacity of the Rishi, has to engage the active component of the Raja. So just as there is no Arjuna without a Krishna, there is no Krishna without an Arjuna. You have to understand it from the other angle as well. Indian civilization conceptualized the Rajarshi as the ultimate synthesis of two faculties of the human being, the active and the reflective. If the king did not have the reflective capacity of the Rishi and the saint, the king would burn himself out in activity, in action that is sometimes mindless. And if the Rishi did not have a king to execute his vision or her vision, the Rishi would be devoid of capability. So the two together, the Raja and the Rishi, is what India enshrined as its highest model of leadership. And it has come to stay.
Thank you, team. May I now request our Honorable Director, Professor Debashish Chatterjee, to address the gathering. Sir, you are on mute, please. Sorry.
I would not want to come between the gurus and the audience, and so I'll be very brief. I'll just take a couple of minutes. Just to say that it is my privilege to be able to welcome such a distinguished and exciting panel of gurus who are timeless. They defy their ages, and on this very august occasion. Padma Vibhushan, Dr. Raghunath A. Mashelkar, scientist, institution builder, and teacher. It is my privilege to have seen him in person, because I've been hearing stories. He's the kind of stuff legends are made of. I met him first when he was receiving an award on behalf of IIM Lucknow from the President of India. And it was my privilege to see him then, and I see him now. I don't think he has grown chronologically at all. He's grown in wisdom and his usefulness and his charm, and he continues to infect us with all of that. And knowing that he's come here despite his illness and his discomfort speaks volumes about who he is. Art, of course, editor, writer, commentator. I first heard about him from Peter Singh in MIT when we were doing a scenario planning thing on behalf of Shell Company. And Peter insisted that I meet this extraordinary human being, but I never had the privilege. So this is my opportunity to hear a voice who truly matters in the world of business. And his writing very impactful and influenced so many millions of people and readers, and I'm not an exception. Distinguished academic, Dr. M.S. Krishnan, co-author of C.K. Prahlad and currently Associate Dean of the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. You're most welcome here. It's a privilege to have a ringside view of CK's life. Moderator of this event, Deepa Prahlad, innovator, innovation consultant, who generously donated her father's stopwatch and his pen, and as well as a copy of his book to the Indian Business Museum, the first of its kind that we have put together. And Deepa Sethi, my deans, Professor Anandanitan, faculty, colleagues, students, and staff members. IIM Kozhikode is perhaps the only school in India to have named an entire classroom cluster in the name of the Guru, C.K. Prahlad. And we were the first ones to make sure that he does not fade into oblivion. In India, of course, he's known. He lives in the hearts and minds of so many people around the world, but we wanted to make sure he lives in concrete. And so here is our classroom cluster. So if you ever come to Kozhikode, you'll see that we cherish his immense contribution to global thought leadership. Few thinkers have articulated and shaped emerging wisdom and strategy more impactfully than he has done. His most well-known work in India, Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, provides startling insights into what could turn poverty into prosperity, something that we wouldn't have imagined in our dreams. He made that concept come alive. On behalf of the learning community of IIM Kozhikode, it is my honor and privilege to flag off today's Gurukul with three extraordinary gurus. One of the meanings of the word guru is someone who sees the whole picture. There are other meanings, but this is what sticks with me for a long time. C.K. Prahlad's dazzling intellect conjured up a whole new vision for management thinking for our world. It is fitting, therefore, that I lend my voice and end with a quote of his from his work. And he said, and I quote, "If you stop thinking of the poor as the victims or as burden and start recognizing them as resilient and creative entrepreneurs and value-conscious consumers, a whole new world of opportunity will open up." How true is that? Over to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightening and inspiring words. May I now request Ms. Deepa Prahlad, author and innovation consultant, to take the center stage and moderate this panel discussion. Also, ma'am, it would be great if you could brief the rules of the house to our esteemed panelists and the audience. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Before I begin, let me just extend my own hearty congratulations to the Institute on this really exciting occasion. It's just such a privilege to be here to celebrate with all of you, and wishing you many continued years of success and impact. And on a personal note, I have to say I'm just very touched to be part of this celebration and to have a chance to reflect on the legacy with some of the closest collaborators and trusted friends of my father. It's a tremendous comfort to the family, and it's also a real privilege. I think all of us have lived through a very interesting, 2 years, and it's a nice time to look back and do a little bit of editing and reflection in terms of what we can take with us as we build back a better. And let me just say that there's some startling coincidence that the people we have on the panel, we've heard so much about their achievements, but Dr. Krishnan was the co-author of my father's last book, Dr. Mashelkar, his last HBR article, and Art Kleiner conducted the last interview, and those last two items were actually published posthumously. So they're very long-time friends who have seen the evolution of his thoughts for a long time. So I just want to dive right in. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Krishnan. You've worked with my father. You've seen him as a professor in executive education, as a teacher, just sketching out things on a napkin. What can you share about his style of work, the way he looked at the world, and what he was like to interact with?
Thank you very much, Deepa, and thank you, Professor Chatterjee and the entire, IIM Kozhikode team for giving me this opportunity. It is indeed an honor for me to be in this panel along with Dr. Mashelkar and Art to share some thoughts. Deepa, thank you. And I'll start with, I think, I would consider myself, very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work closely with the great mind, the beautiful mind, I would say, because it's very difficult for us to explain the experience. But I'd like to try to give some thoughts here. I think CK was very unique in terms of, he's unique in multiple dimensions. He's unique as an academic person because he always had a approach of challenging the existing assumptions. Okay, and usually we see thought leaders and thinkers in academic world. They typically will have one or two big ideas, but CK would actually kind of come with these new ideas every 2-3 years, and starting with the global competition and how does the global organization structure and 80s to then the theory of dominant logic. And that was so popular and then became slowly, into the mindset kind of a, theory later on. But then he actually kind of introduced the concept of co-creation, which is really a big idea. Now it is becoming, we can just see the impact of that. And then, of course, the role of technology, which I had the opportunity to work with him on that side of things. And of course, finally, the bottom of the pyramid. So he's kind of constantly, he would actually question the existing status quo and assumptions. And in fact, it is one of his theories, right? The dominant logic theory, like where you challenge the managers to kind of not just, accept the status quo, but constantly ask the questions about, why is this assumption true? Or, as to your point, Professor Chatterjee about, he said the bifocal, he talked about the weak signals. Weak signals is, the things that is coming, you don't see it fully, but they are weak signals. How do you amplify those weak signals? And that's how you create a perspective about the future, right? That was CK's way of thinking. I think the beauty about CK is that he exactly used that in his research as well, and every problem that he sees, he will see an opportunity there. I mean, there is a unique, optimist, because in terms of, he would ask, why not, right? I mean, kind of even if you look at all these work that he has done, there are some traditional assumptions how those problems have been tackled, whether it is, a firm, engaging with customer, it's more like it is a more product-centric world, that's how business models were organized, or whether it is, how do you look at poor as a kind of value-conscious consumers and entrepreneurs, as opposed to somebody whom we should help through donations, right? I mean, those are all, kind of in some sense provocative way of approaching the existing assumptions. And so that's one of the critical aspect of CK. I would also for our audience, those of us, especially the students who may not know the full the impact of CK, how he was in his work, I'll just give one example. I mean, CK was always future oriented. He had a perspective, he had a point of view, just like you saw in the video, right? I mean, for him, strategy was folding the future in. And so I still remember when I joined University of Michigan 25 years back, and I was an assistant professor, and I had everybody's heard about CK Prahalad when you go to Michigan. My own alma mater, Carnegie Mellon, all faculty told me, oh, you're going to Michigan, Prahalad is there. So I had an opportunity in the first 6 months to sit in one of these, seminars. I mean, it's CK seminar. It's not like a small room seminar. It's just like an auditorium. He was giving a talk. Okay, it is with 400 people in the auditorium, and I was sitting in there, at the end, in the back row somewhere. But I still vividly remember that, the picture that he, and the topic was about, a global competition and a globalization of business. That's around that was a topic. Okay, at that time, the time is 1996, just to give the context, maybe 96, around that time, and maybe fall of 96 exactly, I remember now. So he was talking about global competition and the dynamics of different markets and things like that. And he left the last slide of that presentation, was an Indian family. It's from India, a family with 3 kids, okay, traveling in a two-wheeler. Okay, they were actually kind of in a two-wheeler. The husband is driving the two-wheelers. Wife is sitting in the back. There is one child, standing in front, and then one, sitting in between the couple, and then there is this little baby. The wife is actually hanging; it's hanging to wife's hand. And some of my Indian audience can connect to this because it's a real picture, right? I mean, this is reality, right? This used to be. And then he says that now you don't need. And see, here is CK's statement. He puts this slide and then says, "Let me conclude saying that you don't need market research to say that there is a market for affordable cars here." Okay. And but let me tell you, you cannot design a product for that market sitting here in Detroit. Okay. And you got to be there. You got to kind of smell the soil. You have to be in that part of the world to deeply understand the consumers, and that's how you design products for a global economy. So fast forward 10 years later, or whatever the number of years, then we have Ratan Tata and the Tata Group came with the Tata Nano context. The concept here is the following, right? I mean, it's not just the Tata Nano. The entire the auto industry started pivoting towards competition for small cars. Okay, some got it right, some got it, but you see the kind of thinking inside the boardrooms of seeing this as a market, and that's one example of how CK puts an idea there and then thinks and kind of basically he may be 10 years, 15 years ahead. And that's other side of CK. And then, another quote, like, when he and I started working, and it's just kind of, I just, as I said, I only, thank the stars and, kind of blessings for having this opportunity to work with him. But he and I just, connected in the faculty lounge. And I was just 2 years into Michigan, and I come from the technology side. My work was in the software design, software development. That's where I come from background. And then a quick conversation, I won't get into the detail, for about 10-15 minutes. And then CK wrote this memo to me. And then he said, this discussion we had is intriguing. I would like to, kind of talk with you more, and we have an opportunity to collaborate, because his point was, this is again, 1998, marked the year. Okay. 1998, I would say around fall, November, around this time. He says, "Krishnan, I believe that we are just beginning to scratch the surface of what software is going to do to business." So that's CK saying in 1998. So just giving you another example, okay, of the impact of software on business. And of course, that was our, point of collaboration. That's how we started. And it then kind of, it's a great journey. And then I was so fortunate to have his mentorship. And finally, I would actually conclude, he was such a genuinely nice human being, CK, for what he was. And if you just, if you just kind of, come across him in a street, you will not even guess that he's kind of the CK Prahlad, because that's how, I'm working closely with him, working on the book, traveling with him, doing seminars and all the stuff. I've actually observed him in multiple ways of how he treats individuals, and how he's, that compassion that he had was very special. No matter whether you were a professor, whether you were a driver, it doesn't matter. That he had a very unique way of approaching people. And the last one I would like to add is the passion for India. I'm sure we'll build more on that. Dr. Mashelkar is here. CK's passion for India was special. And I'll stop there. Yeah. Thanks, Deepa.
Thank you so much, Professor Krishnan. It's always interesting to hear other perspectives, because as family members, we were often the first audience for whatever new idea he was producing. He would work all day and print out 3 copies, and my mom would always make a nice dinner, and he would ask all of us to read and give us our honest comments before he sent it out. So it's interesting to see. I think that commitment to inclusion was really on display at home as well. And that's one really cherished memory that I have. And let me go to you, Dr. Mashelkar, because you're actually started out on so many different committees, working on big problems and agendas, and then you became a co-author much later, but I would love to hear your reflections as well.
Sure. To start with, thank you, Professor Chatterjee. Thank you, Deepa, for this wonderful opportunity to pay my humble tributes to a great legend. He was also a great friend, I must say. Professor Chatterjee, you talked about gurus here. I would say he was guru of gurus, of all gurus, Mahaguru. honestly. We learned so much from him. To me, as I always said, he was not an individual, he was an institution. Individuals go, institutions remain, and the institution called C.K. Prahlad will remain forever. He was a timeless inspirator, and he will continue to be one. And I'm very happy about what you have done in IIM, so that our younger generation will get inspiration. Coming back to your question, I was very fortunate to work with him on a variety of different things. We were both members of Prime Minister's National Innovation Council. That was during the time Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. Then there was this Microsoft India advisory board. Both of us served on that. The third was Hindustan Unilever. We were on the board of directors, both of us. And then there was this Reliance Innovation Council established in 2007, where I was the chairman of the council, and we had Nobel laureates John Maryland, Nobel laureate Bob Grubbs of Caltech, and CK was sort of a member of that. It was a phenomenal sort of council. And frankly, just observing him, I learned so much. It was very interesting. If all the photographs were to be taken of all those board meetings, you'll always see somehow or the other my sneaking in and sitting next to him. It was almost like a desire that the great radiant energy that he had, some of it will get sort of transferred to me. There was a kind of a personal bond between the two of us, I must say, the human part of it. The few things that I noticed. First was, he had a great art of listening. There have been occasions for 1.5 hours he had not talked about anything at all. He would just keep on listening. And then whenever he opened his mouth to make a remark, he would speak for 2 to 3 minutes. But that 2 to 3 minutes will be absolutely transformative in that the way he said it and what he said. That was number one. The second was his humility. I always saw that he was always trying to learn. And I have, because of this meeting today, I went through lots of things and found his email on 17 January 2010. So what had happened was that the Reliance Innovation Council meeting, we decided to have in Jamnagar, which is kind of a refining capital of the world today. And it's a marvel, as a matter of fact. People visit India for looking at Taj Mahal. They should look at these enterprises as something they want. And after that, his humble email to me was, "Dear Ramesh, just to let you know how much I enjoyed the last 2 days. I did learn a lot. I'm more optimistic about India's future. Thank you for including me." Can you imagine a giant of man writing something humble? So that was the second. Learning forever and humility. The third that I saw, and Krishnan made gave brilliant examples of that. There is a definition of an innovator which I like. Innovator is one who sees what everybody else sees, but thinks of what nobody else thinks. CK was that. And I've seen that again and again. Microsoft External Research Advisory Board, I still remember. As you know, Microsoft was hung up on selling more PCs so that the Windows software and others, that is where the business is built in. And I remember early in the days, he said, finally, the game is all about the screen. The screen could be television, the screen could be PC, the screen could be this. At that time, of course, smartphones were not there. And he said, finally, the whole world is going to be about that screen, which will be in the hand of everybody. And it cannot be PCs. It has to be this. And at that time, Microsoft were, Krishnan, you know more about it than I do. They were not at all in this at all. And now the world has changed completely. But he was able to see that. Or, for example, I remember our first meeting in 2007, when Jio was not there. As you know, today, Reliance, with close to 500 million customers and offering data at 4 rupees per GB and voice free, They have created a revolution in India. But in 2007, when we met, actually, Jio was not on, even on the cards, basically, you see. And I still remember they had got into retail at that time. And then he talked passionately about the Kirana stores. And he talked about the Kirana culture, how they give personalized services, how they know what is there in each fellow's fridge, and when he can be that and the other. And he then talked about mixing the two cultures where the organized retail, the technological competence and this personalized service, how they can be blended together. And that is becoming a reality today. So I'm just adding to Krishnan's examples on how he was able to think forward. And the last point I like to make is that finally, what is very important is not what one said, but what impact finally it made as a sustained impact. And all these statements that you just now read out or we heard, folding the future rather than extrapolating the past, or forming the next practices, not best practices, always keeping aspirations greater than resources, etc. Then Krishnan, I remember when the book came up, he gave a big talk to us on the co-creation of personalized experience by acquiring the multi-geographic resources, n equal to 1 and r equal to g. Actually, you are absolutely right. He was over there. And also, most importantly, Deepa, at that time, he had told us India should look at sustainability as an opportunity rather than waiting for the international players to set the game, etc., etc. And you can quite clearly see, if you look at Reliance of today, I don't know whether you have seen Mukesh Ambani's statement. He's investing $10 billion in 3 years and plus $10 billion in the next 4 or 5 years to create gigafactories in terms of, and he wants to be the biggest player in green hydrogen, 4 million tons per annum and so on and so forth. They're audacious dreams. But there, he has talked about 1-1-1 strategy. You know what is 1-1-1? 1 kg of hydrogen for $1 in 1 decade. And they are considered audacious by all experts. Okay, but it is driven by what CK had basically taught us. And in my personal life, I adopted. Like, for example, when he said best practice and next practice, I totally agree. And in my mother's name, I have created Anjani Mashirkar Inclusive Innovation Award, where all the awards, 11 years, have been given not for best practices, next practices. Something that didn't just exist, So I think his influence has been absolutely enormous. I mean, of course, I had limited exposure in what I saw, but I've learned so much. That's why I called him not just Guru, but Guru's Guru and Super Guru. I've been very fortunate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind reflection, Dr. Mashelkar. And Art, I would like to turn to you because I think, in a very real sense, there are so many people, whether individual entrepreneurs or, academics who have new ideas. And editors, in a very real sense, are almost like the venture capitalists of those ideas. You really have such a key role in determining which ideas make it into the public domain, are able to be widely debated. And it's a very interesting call. And I've seen this process of multiple iterations. So it's not easy to package and refine things in a way that they can find an audience that is far outside, the field itself. And I'm just curious, though. I mean, my father is far from the only noted person that you interacted with. So I'm curious to have your point of view of how you really evaluate what good ideas look like and how you think about communicating them effectively. And I've noticed that in strategy and business under your leadership, of course, you say the bottom of the pyramid paper had a horrible struggle getting into the public domain, which I won't even detail, but it's ironically probably the signature work today. And since then, I've seen a lot of those core concepts be expressed by various people of how do you expand the social impact of business throughout the pages of Strategy and Business. And I just want to hear from you, like, how do you think about cultivating this long view, and how does your, deep grounding in the liberal arts influence, what ideas you think have longevity and impact in the real world? I think you're still on mute, Art.
Thank you. So I was just joking, a simple question. And before I start, let me also say, how gratified I am to be invited here, and Professor Chatterjee and Deepa, I'm just so pleased that you asked me to join and to be. So first of all, Strategy and Business, like Harvard Business Review, the audience is presumed to be business leaders. And business leaders mean a large, a global group of people, almost like a global community of people now, in an age where, we think about knowledge work as bringing imagination to bear on solving immediate problems that are going to make a profit. If you include not-for-profit leaders, then it's solving immediate problems that are going to have an impact on the world. And we all do our small work, and it adds up to large work. And so as an editor, we would look for people who could do one of two things, who could bring a story to life that would make it clear what the stakes are for a real business decision maker. Or we would look for someone who could take the complexity of the world and find the simplicity on the other side of it and have it click. And, CK did both of those things. He didn't use case studies. In fact, in the interview that we did in 2010, he said very explicitly, I don't draw my ideas from case studies because most of the things that I'm describing have not really been put into practice yet. But you can see, if you look, what is needed. He didn't even say what's on the horizon. He said what is needed to happen. And I always had the, in the times I've talked to him, which were 3 or 4, I always had the impression that he believed that what would be needed would come to pass. I don't think everybody shares that view. I think it's a very far-sighted and pragmatic view at the same time, to have a kind of faith in humanity that will take, what needs to happen and turn it tangible. And I was always attuned to that. I didn't actually make the decision to publish The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. It was my predecessor, my 2 predecessors, Randall Rothenberg, who was editor-in-chief before me, and Graham, who was deputy editor. Randy went to the Academy of Management, Strategy and Business, maintained a presence at the Academy of Management, particularly around international management, where CK was also active. And it must have been 1998 or something. This was probably one of the papers he read to you at the table, but he presented a paper, I think he called it then the base, the base on, under the economy or something, but it was under the visible economy, but it was an academic paper on underdeveloped economies and the opportunity that existed for business not to treat the underserved population as a charity, but to treat them as a market, and that this would go a long way, both for the people involved, but also for the business leaders. Randy heard that and thought there's something here, and was very interested in developing economies and the economic theories related to that. There was nothing like this in theory at the time. It wasn't even controversial. It was sort of not even on the radar to be controversial. And I don't know what happened with the editors who turned it down, but Randy and well, I can quote from Anne because I just asked her to tell the story. She says, at the time, no multinational was looking at the poorest people in developing countries as a market, much less the broader implications for reimagining the idea of underdeveloped economies as emerging markets. CK and I met for dinner to discuss the idea. As I recall, we talked for many hours. And from there, I worked with CK and his collaborator, Stuart Hart. And, you know, I gather that she and Randy actually came up with the title, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which is one of the things editors do. We come up with, you know, titles. So for instance, when he was writing the article about the new organizational structure, we also found our way to the title 10 hubs and no HQ. You know, that in a way, that's sort of the editorial job you were talking about. I'll just add that the business audience is trying to do two things at once that contradict each other. They're trying to make a living, and that means getting along with people. And they're trying to make a profit, and that means transgressing, doing some things that nobody has done before. Indian management and India rapidly became known for its management theory. And my guess about why that happened is because so many business leaders in India, as it, you know, over the past 35, 40 years, have been bucking the tide so much to create global enterprise that they had to do both. They had to, you know, you live in a very old culture with a lot of norms. And at the same time, there's no possibility of success unless you buck those norms, unless you know, transgress in some way. So how do you safely and reliably break the rules? I actually think every significant management thinker is answering that question in some way. And clearly, you know, C.K. Prahalad was one of those people.
Yeah, that's a fascinating take on it, Art. But I also do think that, you know, although my father was certainly not a trained artist or whatever, I think that keen desire to look outside of the field was a signature. When we came to India as children, he always took time to show us. At that time, we didn't have beautiful airports, very little worked. There were, you know, some things that were a lot of inconveniences that were before you, especially in contrast to the US. And he always used to take us to museums, take us to visit architecture and temples. And he would always ask my brother and I, do you think the people who built this believed for a minute they were second class? He really reinforced this idea over a long period of time that resources are not equal everywhere, but skill is present everywhere. But you have to change your lens. You can't start the conversation about what people don't have. You have to look for what's there and figure out how to supercharge it. And for me, that's like one thing that I think allowed him to be such an optimist, even in the most challenging circumstances. And I'm so sorry I got carried away with introducing everybody that I forgot to mention that we'll try to reserve a little bit of time at the end for any questions. Please type them into the chat box and we will try to address as many as we can. I'd like to circle back to you, Professor Krishnan. You know, I think that each one of you in some ways has also had an unconventional path. I know that in your case, your understanding of technology maybe also evolved. You were among the first to try and put, you know, telephones in the hands of the furthest reaches of the Indian population with, you know, CDOT and these institutions. And I'm just curious to see, you know, how you see that, even though your focus is technology, how that colored your view of really looking at access at the inception of how products and services are developed.
Thank you very much for that question, Deepa. And I'd like to be brief. First of all, I'll be very brutally honest in the sense I was very fortunate, and I think I was in the right time at the right place. And my first job that Deepa, you're actually kind of mentioning here is I had the opportunity to work in an organization called CDOT, which is the Government of India, enterprise, championed by Mr. Sam Petroda, and he still has the same energy. And he's a technocrat, having worked in the US for multiple years. But he had the vision to create, indigenous capabilities, and he had the confidence in the skills that are there in India. To Deepa's point about seeking to museums and temples. And he actually believed that, with the Indian talent, we can build digital switches. This is actually, digital switching was a very, very advanced technology at that time, late 80s, for that time. And to give you the idea of, today we talk about internet, and just to think about the core of the internet, the big servers, there are switches actually which switch the calls of the data, right? And that was all at that time, all being imported in India. The digital switching was all imported from Europe or US. And this organization was set up to create, indigenous design of software and hardware. And that was it's kind of a unique experience for all of us, and the average age of the organization was hardly 25, 26. And it was an extension of the university campus, but with advice from, kind of advisors from the US and, technocrats in India. So we had a great experience delivering this, dial tone and phone to the technology for delivering phones to masses in India, because it opened up so much of insights for me. In fact, as a business school professor, CK and I used to talk about this, and he was so much engaged in learning as a listener. Dr. Mashelkar, you mentioned, because let me give you an example. Like, if you go back, 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, or mid 80s in India, you will have to wait for years. You book for your telephone, and then if you want to get a telephone for you, you'll have to wait for years, multiple years. And that's how it's all government controlled. And just to give an example of product design, right? Typically, an AT&T or any of the multinationals who are all pioneers in switch design, when they design these switches, and they assume that, okay, fine, we're going to put the switch in, Chicago or New York or in Detroit, any big city. They actually calculate. What we do is we calculate the population, we calculate the number of lines that the capacity of the switch, and based on, say, number of lines, they will calculate the traffic that will be coming to the switch, like how many calls attempts will be there based on the switches for 2,000 customers, or how many you given 2,000 lines or 4,000 lines. But in India, the interesting thing was, just to give you the nuances of the market, those days, if you had a phone, it's not just you and your family kind of use that phone. The entire neighborhood will use the phone, right? I mean, those of us who are connected to those, those times, you can see that, neighbors and friends and family, everybody will come, can I make a phone call from your phone, right? So basically, the traffic assumptions that you make in terms of how many call attempts would be there is completely, totally different. In terms of, you're not actually designing that line for a family of 4 or 5, but actually you're actually designing the line for a community there, because the entire community is going to call. Now, second, what we did was at that time, so mapping the traffic conditions, we in fact designed the switch by 4:1 blocking. What it means by 4:1 blocking is that, in some sense, simple way to put that is, making an assumption that only 1 out of 4 people connected to a line would actually call at the same time. In other words, what you do is you distribute the accessibility, right? And you are compromising the quality. But it's quite possible that I may call because, Art and Deepa and Dr. Mashelkar are all the other 3 people sharing the same line. The 4 telephones have been given to us. I call and I get a busy tone. I don't get the dial tone immediately. That's okay, because the other alternative was no phone. Okay, so it is kind of, how do you think about unique markets? So I think that gave a lot of experience for us, and more importantly, I think I will actually kind of say thanks to gratitude to the Indian government at the time, the leaders, political leaders, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi in his vision, and Mr. Sam Petroda, and the entire, support from the Indian government to create an organization like this, which I think was one of the flywheels for this confidence in Indian software talent. Okay, in addition to other business houses like Tata's and all, I think this experiment actually proved that we could be actually doing software to the kind of almost at par with the work being done in the Western developed economies. So that is a great experience for me. And more interestingly, the piece about CDOT experience connecting back to CK was when I used to discuss with him, because CK always believed the importance in a global competition. He always questioned that Indian multinationals or Indian or corporate houses should not be doing joint ventures, because he in fact had a paper on the future of Indian joint ventures, authored 1990. This is all before the liberalization of India, right? Where he had said that this is not going to work because you don't have a common vision here in terms of why you're coming to this market. And he insisted the importance of Indian capabilities kind of going global, right? And Indian companies, Indian businesses, investing in talent, building capabilities to kind of compete globally. And so I'm so glad with the theme of the institute here, Professor Chatterjee, because about the Indian capability, Indian skills, and Indian talent, Indian ideas, and coming into the global world. So CK's passion was, one of his passions was that, in terms of how do we build capabilities in Indian business houses to kind of compete globally. In fact, that led to his, starting this famous CEO forum, which is a kind of, a small group of very, very successful business leaders. Now all these business houses are all, multi-billion-dollar houses, and they're very well known in India. But those were, young CEOs at the time, engaging with, the guru of gurus, as Dr. Mashelkar puts in, and kind of challenging them why they need to kind of create this and kind of believe in their talent, local talent, and build this capability for global competition. I'll kind of just connect those in terms of how CK's work and how he used to see, and how that, the example that Deepa mentioned, my experience with CDOT, he was very enamored by the story, and he would actually ask me to recite the story in multiple places in India.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think this is one example where, time has changed so much. Today, you can open up Business Week and see them talking about Kirana Tech and how, you're bringing together global resources for benefit of even really the kind of small shop owner. And that's not being pulled just from India. We've all gotten better at imagining, I think, due to circumstance and due to our new connections. And I'm sure he would be, very open to looking at competing in a different way in the global context we find ourselves in now. I'm going to switch over to you, Dr. Mashelkar, because I think, you also had this, idea of we do need to compete. You're leading such, eminent global research alliances, but there was always an understanding that let's respect the local knowledge we have and then, open ourselves up to competition. And I can say, living in California, you can't really drive 50 feet without seeing a yoga studio and seeing turmeric lattes. And it's a very big change from childhood. So you do see, I think, really the Indian corporate presence, but also I would say the soft power, the respect for Indian ideas and concepts taking root around the world. And I just want to get your view on how you think about these two things together. How do you create respect for local customs and traditions and circumstances, and also really marry that with bringing in the best of technology? I know you've started to address this in your new book, so really excited to hear a little bit about that from you. How do you harmonize the best of local and take it global?
Oh yes, best of local. There is this word intellectual property organization, with 176 nations. And I was privileged to be the chairman of their standing committee on information technology for 2.5 years. And I remember posing a question to them, because what I found was the WIPO, they had knowledge classification in different categories, subcategories. But traditional knowledge did not appear anywhere because they did not look at traditional knowledge as knowledge at all. And I remember it was a particularly emotional speech that I gave. I said, look, you think the knowledge that is generated in Harvard, Caltech, Princeton, Cambridge is knowledge, and knowledge generated by my predecessors in laboratories of life over centuries is no knowledge? How can that be? You know, that was a fundamental question. And I was emboldened to make that statement because what had happened was that one fine morning when I got up, I found that the wound healing properties of turmeric, there was a US patent that was taken. And I remember reading it in Times of India in the morning, and in the evening I was speaking, giving Hussein Zahir Memorial Lecture. And I simply announced that I'm going to challenge it. Now, what happened was that as Director General of CSIR, I had all the freedom in the world. But as Secretary to Government of India, all that freedom was taken away. So I should not have made that statement without consulting the sort of government. Debashish will know more about it. And but I did it because I think from here, not from here. And I gave that particular example. I visited the US Patent Office, and they actually showed to me how they do the patent search. And they said, we simply go and look at wound healing, turmeric powder, and see what comes on the screen. Nothing comes on the screen because all that knowledge is buried either here, in your heads, or in your books. That is where we created the traditional knowledge digital library, with 13 million pages, where all that knowledge is not, because it was otherwise all sort of scattered. So fighting that one pattern gave us but then, of course, wrong patterns have stopped now as a result of that, because the new international pattern classification, which contains traditional knowledge, has been accepted. But it is not so much about protection of what you have. That doesn't help. What can we learn from this? And I always talk about creating a golden triangle: traditional medicine, and modern science, So looking at that experiential knowledge, if I can put it that way, and giving a solid scientific validation and creating, let's say, new therapeutics would be the way to go. So we have all that treasure now. And if we create those partnerships, and in India, in fact, I started a major program in CSR with 19 laboratories, partnering with Arya Vaidya, Kottakkal, and others, etc. And we are coming out with things now where all this blending is taking place. So in response to your question, yes, we have to respect this experiential knowledge and sort of move forward. That is one. And since you talked about my book, I will not miss out this opportunity. The book is Leapfrogging to Pole Vaulting, creating magic of radical and sustainable transformation. And the way it happened was, again, after Reliance Innovation Council, I was having a talk with Mukesh, and he said, Doc, we must leapfrog. And there was some issue. I said, no, why does the frog leap? He leaps because he's afraid of the predators and jumps a few feet. Let us pole vault. The size of the pole determines the size of our aspiration, basically, and how it can be done. And that is how the book actually came up. And there are leadership chapters here in terms of how can we create these pole vaulting leaders, because the meaning there is completely different. And for India, we desperately need that. We cannot be catching up all the time. We cannot be following up. We not only need growth, we need exponential growth, but inclusive growth, accelerated inclusive growth. That means we have to fast pedal everything. Can we do it? We can. For example, if you look at fastest inclusive innovation in the financial inclusive innovation, with Aadhaar, the identity cards, with mobile, and we have been and the policy combination of innovations together, we have been able to create now close to 500 million of such cards, and that's the fastest. In fact, there is a Guinness Book of Record award there. Or if you look at now the challenge of climate change, within 7 years, the light emitting diode penetration increased from 0.7% to 88%, because the cost came down by a factor of 7 by demand aggregation. All right, simple. So and similarly, as I said, in terms of mobile penetration, we were 155th in mobile data transmission and consumption. We jumped to first position, not leapfrog 200, but first position within just sort of an year or so. So India needs that. That is the meaning of this leapfrogging to pole vaulting. So this is my response to your two questions. The first about the blending part of it, which is one side of the story. And second, leadership through pole vaulting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mashelkar. I think that's such an amazing metaphor and such a beautiful way to think about the task ahead of us. And I think all of us are aware that we have to do things differently, whether you're in India or abroad. I think COVID has really shown us the vulnerabilities of both systems. And I would really like to go to you, Art, because I think this past 2 years has really brought even more renewed calls for empathy, for compassion. You study leadership from a unique angle where you're actually even looking at the neuroscience of how we come to empathize and do all of these things, mechanically as well as through experience. And one of the things I found fascinating in your work is that you have this deep respect for understanding kind of the historical arc of saying, well, if you want to, you can't just blindly look to the future. You do need to understand patterns and have some reflection. The other interesting thing that's I want to see how you parse these two is that sometimes the people in leadership positions find it much more difficult to be empathetic and to walk in the shoes of others. So we have this disconnect between what is needed to be an effective leader and some of these neuroscience challenges. So I would love to hear more about this. I think it's such a fascinating dilemma.
Well,
oh, I think you froze momentarily.
Am I moving?
Yes.
Okay. So I just saw a note that says my internet connection is unstable, but it will come back. The leader, people gain competence in leadership as they get older, as they move through their careers. And that's because we're challenged as leaders, sort of every step of the way. This is that boundary between the personal growth issue and the need for organizational change and the need for societies to prosper and to grow as societies. And there's some really clear questions coming up about how much an organization can sort of require personal change on the part of people. How much of becoming a powerful leader or decision maker depends on wrestling with your own internal, demons and your own internal challenges. And it depends a lot on that. And at the same time, if you're a leader of a company, you're not really going to want to ask people to go through some personal growth phase unless it's their decision as well. And I think in so many ways, the COVID pandemic has raised that question. What does our responsibility to the larger social, organizational world require of us personally? And I don't think there's a consensus, but I can talk about what's involved in making that change or making that decision. Our book, The Wise Advocate, with Jeffrey Schwartz and Josie Thompson, talks about the inner challenges that come up as you move along the line of being an increasingly responsible decision maker, person in authority. So you have to learn how to control impulses and emotion. You have to learn how to mentalize, which is how to think about not just what people want, as in, I know what my boss wants and I'm going to give it to them, but in terms of, what is my boss, my peers, my community, my customers, what is everybody thinking? And what are they likely to do next? which actually involves a different way of thinking in the mind, and literally a different, it invokes different parts of the brain. And we talk about the Mentalizers Paradox, which is that, to mentalize is to think about what somebody is thinking. The word actually comes out of research with autistic people. It's called having a theory of mind about what the other person is thinking. And mentalizing is difficult. It takes a kind of practice and discipline. And so as you rise in the hierarchy, you're less likely to do it. The administrative assistant mentalizes about the boss. The boss doesn't necessarily mentalize about the administrative assistant. And the really great leaders, the ones who, gain maturity as they go through their careers, are people who do what I think they evoke the kind of humility that we've been talking about on this panel here. And they learn to continue mentalizing despite the fact that everybody is coming to them and trying to give them what they want. So if you don't do that, you fall into the Mentalizers Paradox. You start leaving behind the kind of behavior that made it possible to be a powerful and compassionate and high value leader in the first place. You no longer that kind of leader because you're thinking too much like a person in authority and not enough like a person who is continually asking questions. That's the theory. This year and next year, as countries, one of two things is going to happen. Either the pandemic is going to continue in some form, or it will become a memory. Either way, we as decision makers and all of us human beings are going to be living with the aftermath of a great deal of sorrow and, emotional response and a lot of pieces to pick up. It's starting now, but I don't think we've hit the real wave of that yet. And because there's a delay, as with climate change. And so a lot of people are going to be asking, what do I have to do in myself and what do I have to do in the world? And, we're going to see panels like this where the question comes up, I think. And I don't think there are easy answers to it. But I think one of the starting points is just that, that question that we referred to, in any of the subjects that C.K. Prahalad wrote about, there's always that question of what are we being asked to do? What's as you put it, Dr. Michalka, what's the difference between the leapfrog where we're being forced to move and the aspiration where we want to achieve something? And I think one of the big challenges is going to be realizing at the same time how difficult it is to meet an aspiration and yet how possible it is for us to do it.
Thank you so much, Art. In the interest of time, I'm going to just share a few very brief reflections and then take the question that we got in and pose that to all of you. I mean, if I look, my brother and I, and even my mom to some extent, always used to rib my dad about his very serious faculty pictures. He never really smiled that much when he was being photographed, but in person, he was just a very warm, optimistic person. And I think if I'm listening to what all of you are saying, three brief memories really come to my mind. The first was, it was just such a moment of pride for all of us in the family when in 2007, he was ranked #1 in the Thinkers 50. And what I did to surprise him was I said, when you get an email from anyone, send it along to me. And I took it and I bound it into a book and I presented it to him. And a day later, he was thumbing through it and he looked so uncharacteristically serious. And I said, what's on your mind? And he said, all of my ideas were the result of this academic sparring, going back and forth, being an outsider, having to demonstrate what I was saying. With this accolade, people may be more hesitant to push back. And so I need to find a way to get a new audience of people who can challenge me. And he very quietly went and began talking to high school students, to people far outside the radar who didn't know who he was, and really prepared the same way he would for any executive audience. And I thought that was such an interesting idea of his. And the other thing is about, how do you take feedback and from who? I think he was always unbelievably open and respectful to feedback, whatever the source. I mean, he would ask people who were driving him from the airport what their experiences were. And a lot of those stories made their way into his work. But where he drew the line was never accepting someone's opinion or judgment on what you could achieve, what your community could achieve, what your country could achieve. He said, that's not, you don't have to accept somebody else's limitations on your capacity. You have to accept their feedback on your work, on its accuracy, on its merits. And I remember when I was working on a book proposal, I was terribly disappointed when I got the first rejection. And he was boarding a plane when I forwarded him this email. And my favorite email from him was like, "Dear Deepa, ask them to go to hell. Love, Daddy." And so I think he was basically saying, listen, you do need to, and I did do a very significant rework before the proposal was accepted, but he was telling us, yes, take feedback, incorporate it where you don't have to change your beliefs unless data shows you that your beliefs are incorrect, right? And the last thing is, he did bring a humor and lightheartedness to very odd situations. I was sitting with him once in the airport in India, in a small regional airport, and the bookstore owner poked his head out and said, came running outside. He said, "Would you happen to be C.K. Prahalad?" And he says, "Yes." And he said, "We're so proud. We can't keep your books in stock. Could you do me a favor, sir, and sign a few copies?" And he said, "Absolutely." So he brought his assistant out with the cart, and he kept flattering my dad as he handed him the copies. And the assistant never made eye contact at all. All he did was just take his finger and peel off the old price tag and add another price tag that was 200 rupees more, right in front of my father. And I looked at that and I said, my God, that was so tacky and so rude. And my father looked at me and started scolding me. And he said, "Deepa, what are you talking about? That is what entrepreneurship is. You can't teach that as a professor. Either you have it or you don't," right? You have to have the courage to act at the right time. He said he didn't hurt anybody. He did exactly what all of us business leaders are telling people to do: be empowered, take action. And he had this sense of humor about himself. He wasn't offended at all. And I think that's the part I miss the most. And I think that's the spirit with which I would love to see, graduates embrace the challenges ahead of them. That, yes, take input, but always cultivate confidence. Remember to test your ideas among the people who are affected by them, not the people who can pay for them. And also have a sense of humor, because this stuff is really hard. And we have to make it, for our organizations, really feel like a field trip, not always like homework. And I think that's how we can all increase our impact and at least have more fun along the way. I did get one question, which I'm going to ask all of you to take very briefly. And I think it's so fitting, given that a lot of this work was focused on the future. What does the customer of the future look like? And I'm going to have all of you just give a very brief answer. Let me start with you, Professor Krishnan. Since it's been more than 10 years, what do you think the key elements of the customer of the future looks like?
I think on one side, the customers are going to are not significantly different from the following dimensions. They're going to be curious. They're going to be value conscious, right? And they're going to be in terms of looking for new opportunities where they can engage in different ways, and they are just kind of open-minded. I think how customers are different is, I think we are all in a connected world today. That means that we are more informed. Okay. And so what that's going to do is that the expectations are going to be different in terms of what it was 10 years back. And customers really want engagement, right? They want fairness, and they are going to be more conscious about the broader implications of business. I mean, so those are kind of some of the things I see how the customers of today are evolving.
Thank you. Now, for you, Dr. Mashelkar, your reflection?
Oh, I think Krishnan has said everything that needed to be said. I totally agree with you, because we are going to deal with a hyper-connected world. And in the hyper-connected world, the customer is not left alone, you know. And different customers, depending upon their economic status, they will be different in terms of their buying power, but the aspirations will be always high. So it's a combination of scarcity and aspiration. And therefore, those will be the winners who can actually deliver on that. All right. So delivering what CK and I termed as getting more from less for more people is going to be the final mantra. That's what I feel.
And finally, you, Art, because I think you reflect so much about meaning and how we find it. I would love to hear your views on how customers are evolving.
Well, the big story of the last 400 years has been the evolution of choice. And, you know, it took very, very few people 400 years ago could have a life different from what their parents' life was. Now, people recognize that they can live places, be with people, have professions, have aspirations, have hobbies, have interests that are very different from how they grew up. And people want that. They don't want to leave that behind. That is a powerful incentive and a powerful dilemma, because underneath that means you have to have a continually growing economy, and humanity can't afford that. Energy will be dramatically cheaper than it was before, so people will have even more choices. Human contact will be more expensive than it was before, meaningful human contact. So people will have less choices. And the only certainty, I think, is that that aspiration to control your life and live the life that you choose will not go away. I think it is one of the big stories of emerging economies everywhere. And it's the story that underlies developed economies as well. And I don't know how people are going to resolve it, but I think it's going to be important.
Challenge that can occupy us for another 400 years, probably. Well, thank you so much. I would like to wrap up and give my gratitude once again to all of you for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for moderating the session so well for all of us. And I must say that it was an absolute delight to hear all the panelists, and I'm pretty sure that each of us have a lot of takeaways from this session. So I would now like to request Professor Anand Kutan B. Unithan, Dean, Faculty Administration and Development, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ayushi. For many of us in the teaching fraternity, Professor C.K. Prahalad is like a Guru Dronacharya, and we are like kind of Ekalavyas, so even though he never insisted on our thumb. I came across his path-breaking work, Core Competence of the Corporation, when I was a student, and my professor suggested this as an essential reading. After that, I don't think there are many authors whose work I have gone through so many times, whether to pass my qualifying examination or to prepare for a training program. I don't think there are many thinkers whose work I have cited more in my classes. So most of his ideas, I learned reading his books and articles. I had only 2 occasions to listen to him personally. One was when he made a very impactful keynote address in All India Management Association convention held in Bangalore. The second was when he was attended our convocation as a keynote speaker. And both occasions were rather very inspiring. And with response to a question by one of the students, he said, "Create the next practice. Don't worry about the best practice." That still remains with me. So this was an occasion to remember all those ideas. The true mark of a thinker, of a scholar, is how long will his ideas would last. And Professor C.K. Prahlad's idea certainly appears to be rather very simple when you read it once, but it grows on you. It's quite profound. And that's why even after so many decades, core competence, which was originally appeared in HBR in 1990, after so many decades, it still remains very meaningful and taught extensively in business schools. So this was, again, another opportunity for us to reflect and reminiscence about Professor C.K. Prahlad and his contributions. So on behalf of IIM Kozhikode, on behalf of all those Ekalavyas of Professor C.K. Prahlad, let me thank Ms. Deepa for moderating this session and bringing this session alive with her interventions and guiding the discussion in the right direction. Let me also thank Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Krishnan, and Mr. R. Kleiner for their insightful words. And this is truly a memorable evening that none of us ever realized that it is more than 2 hours that we are listening to each of the stalwarts. Thank you all. Let me also thank Professor Chatterjee and Professor Deepa Sethi for contributing towards organizing this event and giving us this unforgettable opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.